Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. The recitation of rules and regulations is finally over. All of that had been intended as a preface, preparing the people of Israel for the moment when they would finally cross over the Jordan and enter the land of promise. And in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 1 through 11, Moses provides them with instructions concerning the offering of the first fruits. One of the very first things they were going to do when they set foot in the land was to present an offering of praise and thanksgiving to God, made up of the first fruits of the very first harvest they gathered. This wasn't a matter of if, but when. There was no doubt in Moses' mind that God was going to get them into the land and bless them with a bountiful first harvest. And when he did, Moses expected the people of Israel to show God the gratitude he deserved for all that he had done for them. This offering would be an expression of thanksgiving for all God had done and a declaration of faith in all that he was going to do. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, and have taken possession of it, and live in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from your land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket. And you shall go to the place that the Lord your God will choose, to make his name to dwell there. And you shall go to the priest who is in office at that time, and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to give us. Then the priest shall take the basket from your hand, and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. And you shall make response before the Lord your God. A wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and there he became a nation, great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians treated us harshly, and humiliated us, and laid on us hard labor. Then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror, with signs and wonders. And he brought us into this place, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And behold, now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God. And you shall rejoice in all the good that the Lord your God has given to you, and to your house, you and the Levite, and the sojourner who is among you. Deuteronomy 26, verses 1 through 11. Moses has just finished reviewing all the rules and regulations intended to govern and guide the lives of all the Israelites. Now he provides them with instructions regarding the first harvest they will enjoy in the new land. Moses opens this section with the word when. There was no question in his mind as to whether the Israelites would occupy the land. It was God's will, and it was going to happen. One generation had delayed the promise through their disobedience, but what God had ordained was going to happen. And Moses wanted the people to understand that God's faithfulness was going to require an expression of gratitude on their part. Once they settled in the land and began to cultivate it, they were to follow Moses' instructions. You shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from your land that the Lord your God is giving you. Deuteronomy 26, verse 2. Essentially, this would be the first of the first fruits. The offering of the first fruits was to be a regular occurrence in Israel and was intended to accompany every single harvest. But this command from Moses seems to be a unique offering that was specifically tied to the very first harvest in their new homeland. It was to be a special occasion, marking their official inheritance of the land of promise. At this point in the story, not only would the houses and towns be theirs, but they would reap the benefit of the fruit of the land. Back in the early chapters of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses had told the people what God was going to do for them. The Lord your God will soon bring you into the land he swore to give you when he made a vow to your ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is a land with large, prosperous cities that you did not build. The houses will be richly stocked with goods you did not produce. You will draw water from cisterns you did not dig, and you will eat from vineyards and olive trees you did not plant. Deuteronomy 6, verses 10 through 11. And because God is a promise-keeping God, the day was going to come when they would feast from the vineyards, orchards, and fields they had inherited as part of that promise. When they did, Moses told them they would need to express their gratefulness to God by offering him the first fruits of all that they had harvested. This offering would not only be an expression of thanksgiving, but a demonstration of their faithfulness. By giving God the first and the best of their harvests, they would be displaying their trust in His ongoing provision for all their future needs. As part of the process of offering God the first fruits of their harvest, the people of Israel were to recite the following phrase: "A wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and there he became a nation, great, mighty, and populous." Deuteronomy 26, verse 5. This would be a direct reference to Jacob, who is referred to as an Aramean because he spent much of his early days in the region known as Padan Aram. It was there that he married his wives and began his family. Eventually, Jacob would end up in Egypt, a guest of his long-lost son Joseph, who had become the second highest-ranking official in the land. When Jacob and his extended family arrived in Egypt, there had been just over 70 of them. But by the time they left some 400 years later, they would have numbered in the millions. A significant part of the first fruits offering was the importance that they recognize and remember all the suffering that had preceded God's deliverance. Their arrival in the land of promise had been prefaced by 4 centuries worth of trials and difficulties. But their ancestors had cried out, and God had heard them, and sent them a deliverer in the form of Moses. And Moses himself reminds the Israelites of what God did to free them from their bondage in Egypt. "The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great deeds of terror, with signs and wonders. And He brought us into this place, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Deuteronomy 26, verses 8 through 9. And it was their remembrance of God's gracious actions in the past that was to drive their display of gratitude in the future. "And behold, now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me, and you shall set it down before the Lord your God, and worship before the Lord your God." Deuteronomy 26, verse 10. Their giving of the first fruits of the harvest would be a form of worship. It would honor God for all that He had done and prove their commitment to trust Him for all their future needs. He was and is a good God. He had kept His promise and delivered them to the land just as He had said He would. And as long as they continued to rely upon Him and reverently worship Him, He would continue to meet their needs for generations to come.